Welcome, folks. Thanks for coming on a Friday the 13th. I think we've got some more folks coming in, but in the meantime, I think all of you here are relatively familiar with just an hour. We have just an hour to talk about topics that are important or central to our lives as academics. Hope you all had a good fall break. That already seems like weeks ago instead of, what was it, the beginning of last week, or beginning of this week, actually. So hard to believe we're halfway through this semester as well. So as usual, please feel free to put comments or questions in the chat as we go through. We usually start with a few announcements, and just wanted to, I think you probably all have seen the announcement of Mickey Chi's award. Hooray for Mickey. She won the 2023 Yiden Award for Education Research, which is quite a big deal. There's a significant monetary award associated with this. She'll get funding to support her research for a 3-year period, a significant amount. There's an award ceremony in Hong Kong coming up, and we're also going to be planning a symposium for next year. We're looking around, I think, targeting April 2024, in which we'll bring together people from the foundation, previous award winners, as well as highlight Mickey's work. So it's a great achievement for Mickey and a great achievement for the college. Some other things, just let's see, don't forget to tell us about your latest work. Through the scholarship roundup, we're making an effort to, in future newsletters, try to do more featuring of faculty research and other kinds of achievements. So please make a point of filling that out, and we'll put the survey into the chat before the end of the session. But so for today, we have a really cool topic and interesting group of presenters. The broad topic is starting a new line of research, which is something that I think obviously each of us have experienced, whether it's starting anew as a doctoral student on your very first line of research, or it's over the course of your career making a decision to move either in a large or significant new direction for various reasons. So we've invited a group of folks who are at different career stages, and we'll introduce those in a sec, to speak about their experiences. And we'll have a set of questions that we'll start to ask them to address that relate to making these decisions. How do you know when you should pursue a new idea or question? How do you get up to speed with the current discourse, etc.? So, Punya, you're back. Have you been able to?
No, I don't think we can, because Kim is off today, and the only person who can help with that is her. And of course, nobody knows her login and password.
Oh, geez.
And just let Melissa know in the background that she can't join in. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, you can speak for Melissa then, Punya. Can you pretend to? Probably
Get a wig, change my no. Yeah. Well, I'll let her know. Sorry, I apologize. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's a disappointment. It's a technical glitch on our part. So, but that'll give us a little more time with the folks that we've invited. So, we have 3 people here. We invited 4. We're going to ask each of them to introduce themselves briefly, and then we'll pose the questions. As always, put your own questions or comments in the chat. We're going to let's start with Caitlin Albrechtson, who is an EPE PhD student here. Caitlin, would you introduce yourself? Say a little bit about your professional background and perhaps where you are in your PhD program.
And so I am Caitlin, and I am currently in the Indianapolis airport, so forgive any technological interruptions. And I am in my 4th year, and we're really hoping final year in the EPE program. Recently reached candidacy and defended my proposal. I've done work throughout the program in school choice, and then I've also done a lot of STEM program evaluation under Dr. Aisha Boyce in her STEM program evaluation lab. So, and prior to grad school, I was a teacher for 6 years.
Great, thanks. Tara Bartlett, also an EP PhD student.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I am an APE candidate and about to defend at the end of this month, so I'm definitely looking forward to that. I wear a lot of hats, so I'll just introduce myself in line with what is relevant for our topic today. So I currently, again, am in the EPE program, but prior to that, I was an educator. Mainly all my years were spent in Mesa Public Schools for 14 years, teaching mainly middle school grades, so 6th, 7th, and 8th in English language arts and social studies. Currently, I'm also co-director of our state's Civic Coalition, which is our state's representative organization underneath the national organization of CivX, which really focuses on 3 areas around civics within the US. So 1, professional development for educators, 2, programming for schools and students, and then 3, the research that's relevant in civic education. And so I lead a lot of those initiatives here on the ground here in our state as well.
Thanks so much, Tara. And at the other end of the spectrum, we have Frank Serafini.
Oh, that hurts a little. That hurts. That hurts a little.
Hey, I'm just at the same end of the spectrum, Frank, so I can say it. Would you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I just realized that I've had all 3 of the people who are the other speakers as students sometime or another in one of the classes, and I will attest they're all fabulous students. My name's Frank Serafini. I'm currently a professor of literacy education and children's literature. I too taught here in Phoenix for about 12 years in elementary, mostly 4th, 5th, and 6th grade before coming full time. I did my master's and doctorate at ASU. I'm currently working with the LLT program, and my primary teaching, except for usually one doctoral seminar, is in the master's in literacy education right now. So I'll start there, I guess.
Thanks so much, Frank. Punya, should we alternate posing our initial questions? Do you want to jump in?
Oh, sure. So, Betty, why don't you start the first one? I'm still trying to chat with Melissa, so my head's not 100% here right now.
I'm right here.
Oh, there she is.
Melissa, you got in. How is
My
that?
ASU login still works.
Oh, Melissa, yay.
Okay.
Problem solving. So Melissa, just perfect timing. We just were doing introductions. So would you introduce yourself, your position, and say a little bit about your background? Thank you.
Sure. I'm Melissa Wara right now. I am an assistant professor at New Mexico State University in educational design and learning technologies, I believe is what we're calling it right now. And I was in LLT. I graduated in 2021, primarily looking at like creativity and design and teacher education and some technology thrown in there. And I don't know what else you want to know. I worked with Punya. I still work with Punya quite a bit. He's been a great advisor and mentor.
So the check will be in the mail. Melissa, thank you for that last statement.
Yeah. I'll watch Venmo, but
okay, Venmo will be on. So yes, I am back now, Betty. So I can start off with the next question.
Okay.
Can you, for each of you, let's, I think, go in the same sequence that we went in. So Caitlin, start with you. And thank you for joining us from the Indianapolis airport. So can you briefly describe your current research focus and methods and how you arrived at this particular approach and what's exciting about this?
Yeah, so I am just getting going with my dissertation research, which is to my shock and awe, it is a qualitative case study of a public school program for homeschooling families. This is not necessarily where I thought I would end up. I've been in a lot of spaces, but I am fascinated by this topic. I have always been in the school choice world, but what makes this a particularly salient topic right now is that since Arizona passed universal ESAs, there's been this consequence that has been largely ignored in policy conversations, and that is that these public quasi vouchers are now available for homeschooling families, which is unprecedented. That's a policy that is entirely unprecedented. Since this happened in the last year, just over a year ago, this is obviously a pretty new topic. And there are a lot of things that make it interesting, but there were also questions about data availability. So ways in which I thought I might investigate my areas of interest were really affected by data availability, especially giving timing. Like there's always been jokes with anyone who's worked with me has heard me be like, or does anyone just want to like fund me for like 5 more years so we can make sure I have all the data to do all the methods I originally was thinking about? And so, you know, pragmatism. Now, I do think that there's, in this research, I'm really interested in how this availability of public money for homeschooling has changed the competition in this like new sector of the education market, essentially. So whereas families used to be able to enroll, homeschooling families could enroll in this program and be directly funded through the state, like any traditional public school like setup for funding, they now directly receive that money and they can essentially shop around and pick any number of places to spend those funds. My favorite one that is very controversial, if any of you follow the ESA's debates or you know, creep on the Facebook groups, chicken coops. My favorite one to talk about is, do you pay for school or do you pay for chicken coops? And so in that moment, this program suddenly it had no competition because there was only one route for homeschooling families to receive this supplemental education. And suddenly all these programs and possibilities and the classes and extracurriculars opened up. And so I'm watching this producer side react to this increasing competition. And then I'm also looking at this user, consumer, the family side, and how they're responding to this increase in choices. There's also something here, I think, I've been increasingly thinking about the tension between being how public institutions get pushed into being market actors. And there's this intrinsic tension between being a public institution and a market actor, and how they navigate those conflicts. I hope that answered some of those questions, but it explains why I think it's interesting.
Thank you. Tara?
All right, I'm actually going to ask if Frank or someone can go before me because my partner's getting home and the dogs are going to bark.
Sure, I'll be happy to.
Thanks.
Current research focus and methods. That's an interesting question. I probably have 3 different lines of work, and some of it is research-like, and some of it is more theoretical right now. I just finished and submitted a chapter for the Cambridge History of Children's Literature on word and image, which was a really strange topic, and I had to cover word and image in children's literature from 1914 to the present in 7,000 words. So you can imagine that. So there was a lot of lit review as part of that. I have on the floor behind me stacks of picture books that range from 1914 to the present. So I've been doing a lot of work in children's literature. I kind of bounce back and forth between that and multimodality, but the work there was in children's lit. So a lot of content analysis of picture books I've been using qualitative content analysis and then developed a few years ago a methodology called multimodal content analysis using semiotic resources as sort of the data set from picture books and other multimodal texts. So that is one line. I finished up, and I've done 3 or 4 studies like this, one on movable books last year that got published, and one on metaleptic transgressions in picture books. So a lot of these are very narratological in frame. They bring in a lot of narratology and children's literature literary theory from that side. The other work is probably right now sort of twofold. I'm doing other studies like that for the children's literature world. My other world is I've gone down a rabbit hole, a deep dive in the concept of instantiation from a semiotic perspective. And so one of the projects I'll be speaking about this year is how are the narrative instantiation in picture book form. And what I'm trying to understand is, rather than start with the concept of picture book, start with the concept of narrative that is instantiated across many different modes of meaning. So, because picture books are no longer picture books anymore, right? Now we have apps and 3D and augmented reality and stuff. And trying to come up with a theory that explains or can at least account for all these various modalities has sort of been what I'm trying to do. So I've gone back to Charles Sanders Peirce and the original writings of Saussure to understand the semiotic foundations of picture book research, which has been really interesting, but I don't usually get more than 1 minute into explaining what I'm doing and people's eyes roll back in their head and they ask if there's a glass of wine in reach. So that's another one. The third one is we're still doing work with a lot of Lindsay's data gathering around how do kids make sense of multimodal text. And so always bringing in the impactful part, like you understand a lot about these books now. So what do kids understand? And so still trying to understand how kids make sense of picture books. And though I haven't personally been in the classroom for a few years for any research, Lindsay has and has been doing some work. So I've kind of supported her and a couple doc students work on that. So that's sort of a third avenue. Is that okay? How's that? Okay.
Thank you, Frank. So I was just thinking, if you have to write a 7,000 word history of the picture book, can you just put 7 images in and be done? Because each image is worth 1,000 words.
Yeah, I started off the whole chapter by negating that old cliche saying that I could give you 5 million words and you still wouldn't come up with an image. So yeah.
No, I'm just
right.
I
know. So, look, it was the most daunting piece of writing I've done in a long, long time. And I even, the dean at Cambridge, Zoe Jacques, who's just fabulous. I sent her an email about 3 months ago saying I was having a crisis of confidence and I was completely unprepared to write this chapter. And how the hell do you write? But it wasn't even about picture books. It was about word and image. It didn't even narrow it down from there. So I was just like, yeah. So it was daunting, but something got submitted last week. We'll see what happens.
All right, Melissa. What are you working on right now that has got you all excited?
This minute? No. Well, just a teeny bit of background. My dissertation was on working with teachers in creative methods to address different problems of practice with design approaches. So I did a lot of qualitative stuff, some design-based methods, and I've kind of looked at lately with some colleagues here how we're getting technology throughout our teacher education curriculum here. But it's been about a month, I guess. It's been a crazy month. My graduate assistant, I kind of asked him what he was interested in, and he's a teacher, and he said, well, I want to look at bias and how AI is grading student writing. And, my first instinct to that was, well, you shouldn't be using AI to grade student writing. So that's the first thing. Let's educate everyone on that. But we talked a little bit more, and I thought, yeah, this might be interesting to see. It might be a way to look at the bias in it. And it was a more complex study than I had the expertise to take on. And then one night, middle of the night, I was looking for if I could find some data sets online that already had writing samples and student demographics we could play with. And then I realized that I don't really have to have different writing samples. I can just tell, like ChatGPT, that this writing sample is from a student who attends a lower or an inner city public school and comes from a lower class Black family. And I can ask it to give me feedback and grade a writing sample. And then I can switch it up and say, this student attends an elite private school and comes from an upper class white family. And I can give it the exact same writing passage and see what it does. So I was up in the middle of the night doing that a whole bunch of times. And I think I messaged Punya that there was a pretty big difference between the grades it was giving these 2 students that I was proposing it to. And so from there, I've just been trying different tests. ChatGPT will do it. Claude, absolutely, another AI engine, absolutely refuses to do it. Tells me it's unethical, even though it eventually agrees that my research is ethical, but it still won't do it. But yeah, so that's kind of what we've been doing, trying to get different people together. And Margarita's helping right now with what we're trying to publish first off with this, and then planning future work around this. I'm kind of looking at how to help, pre-service teachers here, like to understand this and how to use this yesterday I taught a class, how to use it as a conversation starter about what is and isn't appropriate use of the AI, and, what the relationship between the student and the AI needs to be. If we're using this in our classrooms, what is that going to look like? Is it the AI telling the student everything and giving them all the feedback, or is the student being in the driver's seat and control, using the AI for their own purposes? So that's the basic summary of what I've been doing. Most recent one was just telling it was a student with I love this one. I have to tell it. The student with a different name. We had Reginald Starr, this passage from Reginald Starr, and then same passage from Jacob Smith, and very different grades, significantly different based on those names.
Thank you, Melissa. So, Betty, do you want to take the next question?
Tara, we still need to hear from Tara.
I'm sorry. Yes, Tara.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
No worries. Thank you. So my research area kind of focuses on 3 different buckets you could imagine. The first one is school democracy. So looking at democratic innovations that are happening within K-12 school campuses. The second bucket is participatory governance. So inclusive and authentic decision-making that happens amongst the entire school community and community partners. And then also the third bucket being civics or citizenship education, depending on what lens or where you come geographically into that space. But I'll discuss that one in a little bit more detail later on. And what really encompasses these 3 areas specifically in my research is a citizenship education model called school participatory budgeting. It's actually derived from the municipal model of participatory budgeting that happens across the world at the city levels and oftentimes in organizations, housing communities, but it originated in Porto Alegre, Brazil in 1989 and has recently started to lend itself into school communities. So here in Arizona, we've actually been doing school participatory budgeting for a decade. It began in 2013 in Bioscience High School, actually underneath Quentin Boyce, Aisha's brother, when he was a principal there, and has since taken off here in Arizona. So currently in Arizona, we have school partners from the southern part of the state to the northern part of the state, and annually about 70,000 students that are participating in this program amongst very diverse districts. And what really sets this program apart in terms of it being a civic program is that it's authentic, it's not tokenistic, and the students are actually deciding how to spend a portion of either the school or the district's budget. That can range anywhere from just a few $1,000s till upwards of $20,000. And then what my dissertation was on, that budget was $1.2 million within the Phoenix Union High School District. And so students actually go through the process of doing a needs assessment within their school campus. During that needs assessment, methods like photo voice are used, survey data that the students themselves are leading underneath our facilitation and guidance. So we draw heavily on the YPAR and the Youth Adult Partnerships framework within that. And then after they do the needs assessment on their campus, they actually ideate ideas to solve some of the problems that they either captured in photo voice or through their surveys with their peers. After they come up with ideas to improve their school campus, they go through kind of a set of parameters to weed out at least the ideas that, are against existing policy or perhaps aren't going to benefit the entire school community. For example, if the idea is, new baseball uniforms for the baseball team, that's not a super inclusive idea. So those are examples of what gets weeded out. Ultimately, there is normally hundreds of ideas that are collected that we want to land at least 100 or less going through that parameters exercise. Sometimes schools will do a primary vote. And with that primary vote, they've done democratic innovations like ranked choice voting with that primary vote to give students some experience on what voting looks like. It doesn't have to be a one person, one vote. And then after that primary vote, the ideas that make it through are gone to idea proposal. And within that, students actually work with their site administrators, district administrators, third-party vendors, if it's some type of project that would need to be installed in some capacity at the school. They oftentimes have to go through the procurement office. So they get to learn all these kind of inner workings and leadership skills, and then also just in general, like policies and the way that kind of this very microcosm of government works within their school community. And after they create the idea proposals, they present those back to the greater school community. And so sometimes you have parents that are voting, families, other students of other grade levels, the administrators, the teachers, staff, and those ideas then go and get voted upon. And depending on what the budget is, however many ideas can fit within the budget, normally it's 1 to 3, the top 3 that get voted in, get funded and enacted. And so we've seen a lot of different ideas that deal with sustainability here in Arizona. So shade structures, the refillable water fountain stations, beautifications and greening of campuses, but then also other ideas that help with social emotional learning. So in Mesa, they actually did an inclusive process where they had an overrepresentation of students with disabilities on the student steering committee for this. And they voted in having a school therapy dog, which that was in 2018. And that's now how the entire district in Mesa has school therapy dogs. So that was something of a domino effect as well that we saw come through this process. But ultimately, we really draw on just this idea of like students being agents for change and then equipping them with these civic skills within kind of the areas of knowledge, attitudes, skills and practices that carry through past their schooling experience and hopefully make them better citizens. And that's a small C citizen, because you can be a citizen of your school, a citizen of your community, a citizen of your city, but just in general, a better citizen for themselves and the others around them.
Thanks, Kara. I think I'm going to just move, since you gave us such a great description of this just fascinating process. I'm going to ask you to start with our next question, and that's thinking about your research, and maybe not everything, but maybe an aspect of your research. Can you describe how, if at all, the research questions, theoretical perspectives, or methodologies that you started with might have changed over time, and why? And anything you want to add about what was challenging about the shift, if you had to unlearn certain things. So
this is not only a challenge, but I guess a beauty of the school participatory budgeting process. I'll speak specifically to that in my research. In working with school partners, there's always some type of end objective that every different school or district wants to have within their process, right? So one example, we worked with Roosevelt Elementary School District this past year, and their focus in this process was essentially increasing their social emotional learning skills of their students throughout this process. So a lot of the different activities, and I'll back up, we actually partner with the Center for the Future of Arizona. Their team does a lot of the more practitioner training and different activities with students, while we do more of the research and evaluation and greater support overall. My advisor and I at the Participatory Governance Initiative downtown at the School of Public Affairs. So we do a lot of kind of co-partnering with the Center for the Future of Arizona, but we go into schools and we actually ask them, what do you want to get out of this process? And so, for example, with Roosevelt, they really wanted to work on social emotional learning. So what we bring to that is we bring, a literature review. We present that to school leadership very early on in the school year, kind of like, well, here's kind of, some of the policies, the programs, the procedures, the outputs of social emotional learning. Which of these do you want to, put into the research design? So a lot of what we do isn't actually decided until we co-design that with school partners. We've done the same with Sunnyside School District down in Tucson. Theirs was a huge sustainability focus. And so all of their projects needed to have some type of underlying sustainability practice. One of the cool projects that came out of there was shade structure, but they actually partnered with the local Tohono O'odham tribe and built a shade structure that's a wapa of what is their traditional version of a shade structure. And so things like that we can provide in terms of partnering with other community partners that surround and support the school, literature reviews based upon what it is that they need. So it is challenging because we go in very much an open book in terms of, well, here's what we can provide, but what is it that you want to get out of this process? And so some of the things just in general is the school climate is a huge piece of that. So we've done a lot of research in there. And shifting that most recently with Phoenix Union, and I'm not sure if you've followed the news on that, but it was back in 2020 when they decided not to renew their contract with Phoenix PD. And so for school resource officers, and so one of their shifts was looking at school safety broadly. And so what our team actually with CIRC, the Southwest Interdisciplinary Research Center at the downtown campus, we really partnered in bringing forth what are these school safety alternatives and providing the district and the school community with different ideas that they then embedded in their school participatory budgeting process, and then a student safety committee that was very much like a citizens assembly, democratic innovation that happened parallel to that. So a lot of, again, what we do is only done through after consultation with our partners. And so we're constantly having to shift where we're drawing our research from, our research focus. So it's kind of neat to be able to kind of learn different things and different methods that they want to enact throughout the process as we go as well.
Thanks so much. And made me realize, at least my framework going into this probably was biased in terms of thinking of us as researchers having primary control over the direction the research takes, rather than it being a participatory process, which is what you're describing. So interesting, really cool example. Caitlin, let's go to you. You're early in the process, I think, but have you experienced some changes in your thinking about your research?
I think some, but I also say it with the disclaimer that I have never felt particularly tied to any one methodology. And I say this hesitantly, knowing there are people in this room who have taught me all the way back to my very first semester in grad school and maybe don't love that I feel that way. I blame Dr. Serafini, honestly, because I walked into his intro to social theory class first semester and he said, no theory is true. And that's all I've believed ever since then. So, the opportunity to flexibly approach, right? Like the very real question is your research question will guide you to methods. There are things that simply require methodological flexibility. And for whatever reason, my interests have really spanned across. So there has been change. I mean, originally with the universal passage of ESAs, which were not even primarily on my radar until shortly before they became universal, I definitely thought I was interested in this from a very specific lens, and there's just not the data available that allows for maybe the more quantitative approaches that I had hoped to pursue. And so it was a very pragmatic decision saying, we want to learn what we can with what we have and what we can generate. So I don't know, that may not be a very satisfying answer, but both my theoretical perspectives, I will say from a theoretical perspective point, because I have always had an interest in school choice, I always come back to kind of an economic view, a market view of education, not as a good, I'm not moralizing here, but as a way of understanding and conceptualizing the relationship and the behavior of actors within education. So I do come back to that one. There are always the guiding lights that are necessary in whatever approach one takes. But I don't know. I'm never sure if my ability or desire to be so theoretically and methodologically flexible is like a benefit or maybe a hindrance to specializing. So feel free to think of this as a cautionary tale if you want. So.
That's a great point we might want to return to in discussion. Because I agree, some people frown when you talk about being pragmatic in your research approaches or decisions. I probably align myself more with Dr. Serafini's apparent perspective. But Frank, why don't we move to you? This would be a nice piggyback.
Yeah, I'm sure I just said that tongue in cheek. There are some theories that are true, but most of them are partial, plural, and wrong. So, for me, I'm not sure if it's pragmatic, but for me, it's the only way. And I think all the changes in my own research in the last 10 years or so are based on asking different questions, right? I mean, that's where it begins. I don't like to claim a methodology before I claim a question. And because my questions have changed, my research methods have changed, and I'm not sure if that's flexibility or pragmatic utility or what, but I don't know any other way to do research because it has to begin with the question. And so for many years, my work began, and a lot of my first books had the word reading in it. And it was primarily a linguistic act, right? It was a language act. The act of reading was not about reading images as much. And so when my focus shifted from from reading to what I would just call interpreting, which includes all modalities, then my questions and my methodologies had to change, because the ones that were sort of based in a linguistic imperialism were no longer satisfactory for looking at these other things. And so I think that the changes in questions should always force a change in methodology, right? I did, my dissertation was a year-long ethnography of a teacher going through the national board process. And so it made sense because I followed her around for a year. I mean, ethnographic work was the best way to understand what she was going through in this process. But I've done only a couple sort of ethnographic studies since, because I haven't asked those kinds of questions, right? And so you said about what's making the difficulty and the shift for me. After we ask questions, I think I have to understand what theories speak to the questions. And that's what's driven me to read things that I still understand very little and have put me in other places to struggle, right? And so the work in social semiotics, and especially the early semioticians and some of this work, is really interesting, but it's very abstract at times. And I'm always trying to make it practical for my own work. But when you ask questions like, how do things become meaningful? It's hard to begin with data, right? And so what's interesting for me is, how does a narrative become meaningful in a picture book form? And so to answer that question, I had to read everything from Kant to Peirce to just stuff that I don't have a philosophy degree that I would need. But I also think that education research in general would benefit from getting outside the bounds of educational research. I just think that we too often read other educational research when we really should be reading philosophy and social theory and critical theory and whatever else it is, And I think, Betty, Jim has always been really good at this, that he never comes at his educational questions from just a purely educational stance. And I've always loved his work because of that. And I think that for me, when I've gone from reading to understanding picture books to multimodality, you have to change. And it's daunting at times, because you feel like you're looking at new journals with new people and you're not speaking this language. One person wrote on a review recently, is this a doc student's writing? And I was like, yeah, there you go. Take on a new area, right? And I'm writing like a doc student again. But just for the record, it did get published, and they were wrong. It wasn't a doc student. But I think that's challenging. And so if you're just coming out of a dissertation, you've got a couple of methodologies and a couple of theories in your toolkit. Great, you're doing great. But those didn't last as my questions changed. So I think it's daunting, but I don't think there's any other way to do what we do. I just can't, if you're not changing and moving forward, you're dying on the vine, I guess.
I was going to say, Frank, I think you're a great model, because it can be too easy sometimes as an academic to stick with what you know. Going back to that what seems like starting all over again and mastering a new discourse is scary, right? And particularly if you've been successful before in another approach. Well, you also said, we won't have time for all these issues, but as you were talking about the importance of changing as your questions change, I also thought, well, but why do your questions change? And how do those change? And for example, what's the role of theory in changing your questions? So it's probably,
that's right.
This is not a linear process.
They influence one another, right? You're absolutely right. That the reason my questions change is because my theoretical foundation changed, and vice versa. Right? It's both and, right? Yeah, you're exactly right. I agree. Why if you want to read something interesting, and I would recommend it for anybody who's never read it, go back to Charles Sanders Peirce's The Fixation of Belief. And when we believe something, we stop asking questions, right? And so it's quite an interesting little essay, but I think that's part of it, that there has been doubt in the work I've done in reading to answer the questions going forward. So therefore, I had to find new theories to help inform to move forward. Yeah.
Melissa, eager to hear about your experience here. So, yeah, dive in. What's changed, and what was tricky about it, or what is changing during the process?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not that far out of being a doc student, but I feel like a doc student again. I message Punya like a million times a day. I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I'm like all this imposter syndrome and I can't, I don't know this field and trying to find people to collaborate with. I think the question point is interesting for me. And I'm just going to talk simply qualitative and quantitative. I was not interested in quantitative questions. I didn't like narrowing my questions so much that it would allow for a quantitative approach. I didn't like taking things, trying to dismiss context. Not that it dismisses context, but for me, that was what was really interesting was the complexity in a situation. And it still is. And the strange thing about this is that I can isolate. The only thing I know that the only thing I'm changing is the student name. And so all of a sudden, because I've always liked the logic of statistics, but all of a sudden it works more for me. Of course, the other question is, what does this mean anyway? So we can do all these methods and we can look at these patterns of bias. And I think that's an interesting way. There's just a lot of different ways you could do this, kind of looking at patterns of bias we can say in society, it's in the training data, and in some other overlays that they've put on it that kind of, so it doesn't always mirror what we would see necessarily in the general population, but it is an interesting way at isolating variables in a way, isolating impacts on something. But yeah, it's been, trying to find the right collaborators. Honestly, I watch a lot of YouTube, like the computer science stuff. I mean, this has only been out, it's been less than a year since LLMs were made public, since ChatGPT became public. And so a lot of people don't really know how it works. And there aren't like books on it that are recent enough. Like, you read a book and in 2 months, it's going to be out of date. And the computer science journals, I do not have the background to understand them. I have no idea what they're talking about. So I found I just watch a lot of YouTube videos, people giving lectures in different places about how these things work. It's great when they're lecturing undergraduates, trying to explain how that's working. But it still kind of feels like if I'm writing about this, I really have no idea what I'm doing. And then, yeah, just needing that statistical help. Margarita has been amazing with kind of stepping in and helping me feel better and giving me advice on how to do this, reaching out to other people. But it's been fun. It's fun that it's something that I can share with people and it's pretty understandable. So it's something I can share with my family or other people and everyone gets excited about it. The next question is, what does it mean anyway? And what do we do about it? But yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of just random thoughts right now, but that's where I am with it, is trying to get enough background in different areas that I can feel okay publishing and writing about it, but also trying to find collaborators that can help with this. And I'm at a smaller university. I don't know as many people. And so it's a little bit tricky to find the right collaborators as well, who can bring these different areas of expertise to this. So, yeah.
Thank you, Melissa. But if I can jump in here, quick comment about a broader thing that was discussed. So, Frank, you talked about this thing of the research question. And I remember reading this paper when I was in grad school by these two philosophers of science who were trying to sort of cut through this knot about the whole idea of Kuhnian idea that paradigms are incommensurable. And how do we address that? And the way they did it, which I thought was a really smart move, they said that scientists are genuinely interested in understanding phenomena, that theories and frameworks and paradigms are what we create in order to understand the phenomena. So I have always talked about research as what is the phenomena that you're interested in? And then the research and the questions have this sort of loopy effect on each other. Depending on the framework you pick up, certain kinds of questions become more salient. And then you go back to the phenomena and you ask yourself, is that the aspect of the phenomena that I care about? So the analogy because I've been working, talking with Melissa about this a lot, And I honestly feel like I am back in grad school because I am also learning something new about this technology and its psychology. That the phenomena of this AI, that it has implicit biases, is inherently interesting. Then one can approach it like people like Ruha Benjamin and others do as philosophers and, or the historians of technology. But you can almost take approaches from cognitive psychology or social psychology and test it on these beings. And that to me is sort of,
that's a great point. But I also would suggest that there are some things that are incommensurable when we get to the level of ontology or epistemology, right? So, for example, when you've used this word quite a bit so far, when we talk about bias, it assumes inherently that there is something or the potential for something to be unbiased. And there are epistemologies and ontologies that would reject that concept outright. Right. And so, there are people say that the phenomenon between, where you have an empiricist and a rationalist in the room yelling at each other, that the phenomenon, what comes first, the conception, the idea or the experience. Right. But I think this thing, that this mashup between theory and research question is epistemological. And I don't know if our students and our faculty and people know enough about epistemology to be understanding the claims they're trying to make at times, right? And so when I say to Caitlin that there's all theories are untrue, it's because I hold a worldview that most of these things, these grand narratives, have been, we've moved past them, right? Whether it's postmodern or post-structural or post-qualitative or whatever. But it assumes a certain way of looking at the world, and from that comes what we mean by a phenomena, right? And then we get to unit of analysis and those things. But I agree with you that I usually begin with a phenomena and ask a question about this thing. And then I read about Kant's notion of the noumenon, which is not phenomenon, and then that led me to a lot of drinking. So I had to put that stuff away.
Thank you.
What is the thing in and of itself before we experience it? And that was a long night. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole discussion about which comes first, the concept or the precept. And man, you're taking me back to grad school. All right, we should back off. I'm looking at the time here. Betty, can I ask one question that we can sort of summarize across?
Please do. Yeah.
Thank you. So we can go in whichever order we want. But, we often tell doctoral students, and I've gotten this my entire career, Punya, you need to focus, right? So which is find this thing and, stick with it, because that's how you're going to build your career. Most of the role models that are pointed to us are that way. But clearly in this group, we are having this sort of conversation, which is about shifting and the value of shifting. So I would actually open this up to others in the meeting as well. So feel free to jump in. Like, what kind of advice would you give people who are coming after you about sort of the value of doing something like this, or the sort of challenges or things that they need to be thinking about as they seek to expand or change or shift directions?
I'll start us off with one comment from Robert Heinlein, who said specialization is for insects. Remember that old famous adage, right? And Wendell Berry talks about, academics should learn how to change a diaper, and the list of things you should be able to know to do as a competent human being. I think I've always played into that hand more. A lot of people, some people do their dissertation and their research is a beautiful, string of events that go right from it, right for the rest of their career. It's not been my way. I don't read that way, and I'm not built that way. But I think we kind of have trajectories for a while. We get on a thing and it goes in this way for a bit, and then something happens and we kind of come back the other way. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Being in here is reminding me. Oh, sorry. I was going to say this whole thing is actually just reminding me why I enjoyed Dr. Serafini's class so much. I walked away always being like, I think I know like less and more somehow. But I definitely think, and this is more of probably a my worldview thing than particularly useful, but there's nothing quite as healthy, I think, as consistently asking the possibility of I could be wrong. And I think being able to bring that? Like, I don't know. I guess I've gotten really jaded looking around and seeing so much research that starts knowing the answer. The answer is known, and then we'll figure out how to get to that answer. And so I think that's something maybe that level of uncertainty and freedom to explore. It's difficult, right? Like 4-year timeline for, in this particular context, there's limits, but in general, I don't know. I encourage it despite the fact it does seem to make life harder. So I don't know, there is that.
I was just going to comment. I would love advice about what to do with this without seeming overly unfocused and like I'm just jumping to the newest thing all the time, because I am working towards tenure and I don't know how to manage this exactly.
Yeah, but see, just like bias, when you have focus, you assume that there's an unfocused and vice versa. By putting one up, you have to assume there's another one. And I think there's very few people who are on this call who are senior researchers who can, it looks really nice in hindsight to draw the plot diagram of how you got to where you are, but it really is more of a Gordian knot, and anyone who tells you different would be lying. It's just not that simple. I think no matter what you do as far as tenure goes and those kind of, institutional things, you have to be able to rationalize the decisions you've made along the way. And I think that's really important. I mean, sometimes a serendipitous research project falls in your lap, but you still have to decide to take it up and go. And then the question, like Betty asked, if your questions are changing, what forced your questions to change? And in other words, if you went down a different path all of a sudden before you go up for, you're going to have to explain to someone why this was an important change. I don't think that's bad, but it should be at least an intentional decision, not a, hey, someone's got a project, I'm going to jump on it so I can put something on my Vita. I don't think that's a good idea, if that's what you mean by focus, unfocus.
Caitlin, to your point about research articles looking finished, and the time something Frank said, we make them look that way, right? And I think that's one of the things students may not appreciate. I tell students that the path looks a lot like this. You've heard me say this, and like Frank's, but we write it as if it's way more linear than we actually experience it. And I think what gets lost in that is a whole lot of fits and starts that may not turn out positive or may not be productive today, but could be later. But as a reader, truth be told, you really don't want to go through all of that, right? You kind of just tell me what you found and not necessarily all the fits and starts to get there. But I hear what you're saying. There is a lot lost in terms of the process when we write them that way. And your dissertation will likely look way more organized because I'm on your committee than I know you have experienced it.
I think we need
but somewhere we've got to be more transparent with this stuff.
Yeah.
Yes, an article looks finished, but somewhere we've got to be able to show people how the sausage is made. And in the last year, doing some work in Norway and in Sweden, the doc students have so appreciated me showing them pictures of the books on my floor and the Post-its I'd taken out to get to where I got to. And I think that getting behind the curtain to what we're thinking is really important. And I think that we should find places to put that into our pieces that we write more. I agree, Gabe. Yeah, I agree.
I was just going to jump in and say one of my favorite types of conference sessions was at a games and learning conference. They came up with this idea for a hall of failure, where what you presented were your failures, not, your neat and tidy successes. It was great. I learned more at those sessions than at any others, and loved presenting at it because you could be candid about what didn't work. So
I told Heinemann years ago that they should write a book called 150 Lessons That Didn't Do Anything for Anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Because every person who's ever written you think research articles sound like they're beautifully created. Pedagogy books, you think like, where are the angels in this classroom with the magical teacher that makes everyone happy and want to read, right? And so I said, you should ask every Heinemann author to submit one shitty lesson and write and publish that book. People would love it, right? I agree.
So
I agree. We should do it.
There's a paper, a very famous paper by the Nobel laureate Peter Medawar, the title of which I think I'm going to paraphrase, but capture the essence, which is the scientific paper is a fraud. And partly what he's arguing is exactly this, that in the act of writing it, we sort of ignore all the blind alleys, all the, I mean, the classic example being reading, Watson and Crick's paper saying, we offer a structure for the deoxyribonucleic acid, and reading the book, The Double Helix, right? One throws you right into the drama and the people and all of that of doing that work. And the other is this really prosaic sort of like, okay, we have these, whatever, blah, 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 and they go in a double helix. And I think that we need more of those kinds of conversations because it's truer to the complexity and the richness of the process. I think that we sort of lose in the final document, right, that we create. So just a quick thought on that. Well, we are at an hour, Betty. This time just
flew
by.
Yeah, it just flew by. So thanks to everyone, our discussants, and all of you who came to join the discussion. And it was just great. I wish we had another hour, but probably just as well we don't. We also have an hour. I was thinking we need to do Hall of Failures for some of these upcoming sessions, which would be actually really
Great
fun.
idea.
Yeah. So thanks so much, everybody. Any final, next week for just an hour, we are featuring two more of our Learning Futures collaboratives. The one Learning Futures collaboratives on ethics, and I forget your full title, Punya, for the AI group.
We changed our title to just AI in Education.
AI in Education. So, and actually we have a second LFC also focusing on that. So please stay tuned and join us next week for just an hour.